Hi, Mike here. Today I'm going to be recapping UFC 319 that took place over the weekend, headlined by Dricus Du Plessis and Khamzat Chimaev. I know I'm extremely late to the event recap, but I thought it was better to release it now rather than never. I've had a lot of technical difficulties, but we're now back and we're going to be making the best content on YouTube. Starting off with the early prelim opener, though, we've got Alibi Idris versus Joseph Morales. A lot of people were picking Alibi Idris in this fight, and I was one of them. I thought that he was going to be too much for Joseph Morales, especially in the grappling, but that turned out to be exactly opposite. Joseph had a good first round. It was pretty close between the two of them. Idris has an issue, though, with his striking, where he only throws hook kicks and spinning elbows or wheel kicks. So after the first round, he was looking a lot more tired than Joseph Morales, and he wasn't really able to land anything good. I think a jab or a leg kick would have done him a lot better in this fight rather than just spamming the spinning attacks. But in the second round, Joseph Morales, I think, was able to get Alibi Idris down, and Idris ended up on top, but sat in the guard for a bit too long with one arm in and got triangled by Joseph Morales. It was a very good performance from Morales. I still think that Alibi Idris, if he can clean up his striking, will be able to get back to the UFC, though. Moving on to the next fight, we've got Karine Silva versus Dione Barboza. The commentary would have you believe that Dione Barboza was absolutely smoking Karine Silva in this fight, but it was a pretty close fight. I actually did give it to Dione Barboza live. I picked Karine Silva coming into the fight, though, but round one was a decently close round. They were doing a lot of boring feinting at range. It was not a fun round. Karine gets taken down at the end of the round. Barboza had a close rear naked choke and armbar, but neither were actually landed properly. Round two was a decently close round again. Karine was able to take down Barboza early. There was a couple of scrambles. She ended up on top. There was not really much damage either way, but I leaned to Karine Silva due to two arm triangle chokes, but they weren't very close, so I wouldn't mind that round being given to Barboza. Round three, Barboza gets a takedown. Karine was able to reverse position and went for a tight guillotine. She lost it, but body triangled on bottom where Barboza did no damage. It was a close fight. I don't really know who wins. There was kind of no damage, so I'd be happy even with a draw. But the commentary would actually have you believe that Dione Barboza was 10-7ing Karine Silva throughout the fight. But I don't think anyone can be angry about the decision because there was really nothing happening throughout the entire fight. Moving on to the next one, though, we've got Edson Barboza versus Dricus Close. I picked Dricus Close to get this one done by 30-27 decision. He got it done by 29-28. I don't know how people were scoring this fight to Barboza. Even though strike numbers were somewhat similar, it seemed like every time Close landed on Barboza, Barboza was doing the stanky leg. It looks like Barboza doesn't really wear damage as well as he used to. The entire time, I don't know if you can see my eyebrow over the glasses. I don't know if you noticed, but he's constantly like this in his fights now. I think he's had some issue with his eye. And that part specifically in his eye swells up like a balloon, and that was the case after the first round. Barboza wasn't looking too strong in the clinch. I think coming up from 145 made it a lot easier to be held up against the cage by Dricus Close. But Dricus fought pretty well. He started very fast in all the rounds. He was lunging in, ducking slightly to the right, catching Barboza, and Barboza was finding that timing really difficult. Round three, though, Dricus held him against the cage, landing some right hands. Barboza looked really tired and slow in that round, but it was a close-ish round. I wouldn't mind you giving it to Barboza. I think Dricus Close was the one guy throwing spinning wheel kicks, which was not what we expected in this fight. But Edson Barboza at this point in his career isn't looking the most slick, isn't the fastest. He's 38 years old now, I think. I think it might be time to hang it up for Edson. I love watching him. I used to love watching him fight, but after the Lerone Murphy fight, you could see it wasn't the same guy in there. Moving on to the next fight, though, we've got Alexander Hernandez versus Chase Hooper. As soon as the fight started and Chase Hooper started spamming the spinning back fist with his chin first, I knew it was all over. Hernandez was looking for the counter right throughout the entire fight as Chase was coming forward, and Chase strikes with his head completely on centerline the entire time. Even if he's chasing down Hernandez, his head is on centerline and he's perching his face forward, like waiting to get cleavered. And he shot a couple of takedowns, but the footwork of Alexander Hernandez was proving to be too difficult for Chase Hooper to get around. And I think Hooper got caught with a counter right over the top, And then as Hooper flipped to his back, the ref stopped the fight. I thought it was an early stoppage, but Hooper was in that like Anthony Smith position with his hands and knees and his head in his hands. So it wasn't really too bad of a decision from the ref to stop the fight. Moving on to the next one, we've got Jessica Andrade versus Lupi Godinez. I thought Andrade could have won the fight. I thought she won round 2 and 3. I actually picked Andrade coming into it, but that could be a part of it. I thought Lupi was landing a lot of shots. I think round 2 was literally a flip of a coin. But Lupi was landing a lot of good kicks, a lot of body shots on Andrade. Andrade was landing some nice body hooks herself as well. One thing about Andrade, I've noticed that she literally, her only defense is like leaning back with her hands down. Early takedowns from Lupi definitely helped her in the fight. Another thing from Andrade, she throws her hands. Any shot that she throws, her other hand is actually at her waist. But Andrade in the third round beat up Lupi Godinez. Lupi was a lot more slick in the first 2 rounds. She was landing a lot more straight punches, catching Andrade here and there. She was shooting a lot of takedowns. And I can really see why Lupi won the fight. I just thought that Andrade did a little bit more damage throughout the fight. Moving on to the next one, though, we've got GM3 versus Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. I picked Mikhail Oleksiejczuk by first round KO. He started really fast. He was throwing some really nice right hands. GM3 was spamming takedowns at like 0.5 speed. We know he needed the third round before he started loading in, but Mikhail Oleksiejczuk was able to show that on the feet he's absolutely that he was absolutely ahead of GM3 at every step of the fight. Once he knew that GM3 was going to be so much slower than him, he started looping the uppercuts really low, trying to catch GM3 whilst he was shooting the takedowns, and that sort of stopped GM3 from coming forward. And then Mikhail landed an absolutely nasty 3-piece combination, putting down Gerald Meerschaert. The first few times he dropped him, he didn't follow to the ground. You could tell that Gerald was sort of like flopping to his back to recover, not because he was necessarily trying to get out of there, but the third time that I think it was second or third time that Mikhail was able to drop GM3, followed him back to the ground, landing some beautiful hammer fists. I think Mikhail needs to fight some guys who are like up and comers, but got some really good striking, so we can test him. I think he's a very good fighter, and I think if he can get like a good little run up, I could see him becoming a ranked fighter in the future. Moving on to the next fight, we've got Baisangur Sirsakhaya versus Eric Nolan. I thought that Baisangur Sirsakhaya was going to win this one by, I think I picked decision. As I did think that Eric Nolan was quite good. I thought that he was going to get signed to the UFC either way, no matter the way that the fight looked, because he's quite a good prospect outside of the UFC, and he proved that in this fight. In the first round, Baisangur looks like he had no respect for Eric Nolan. He was coming forward, emoting, getting tagged a lot in the boxing. I knew his head movement wasn't amazing coming into the fight, but that was shown definitely to be true. But once Sirsakhaya got the takedowns, he was a lot more effective in the fight. But I must say, Eric Nolan is an absolute dog. Coming up from welterweight division, moving him into middleweight on 4 days' notice against a guy like Sirsakhaya, who trains with Khamzat, looks really good on the regional scene, and looked really good in his Dana White Contender Series debut. So it was a really impressive performance even for Eric Nolan to survive in the fight. But Sirsakhaya was smiling at each punch, but his evasion of punches definitely needs to get better. It was like he would just smile and let the shots hit him. But in defense, he was doing I've got such an itchy nose right now, and I don't want to just brutally sit there picking my nose and scratching it. But, sorry, I have to do it now. Okay, we're good. But round 2, Sirsakhaya looked the much more composed out of the two. He was looking for some good kicks, hurt Nolan's leg with a leg kick. He was throwing some good body kicks. I will say, even in the first round, I thought that Nolan's body was a little bit soft to the body kicks. But Nolan rolled for a leg after hurting his leg and ended up on bottom. Sirsakhaya was able to dominate for the rest of the fight, getting a rear naked choke. I'm super excited to see what he can do in the future. And I like that Eric was re-signed. I'm interested to see what he can do at a full camp in the welterweight division. I will say, though, Baisangur Sirsakhaya, do not try to chant your name in a fight where no one knows who you are. Like, it's your first fight in the UFC. Like, not a single person in the arena chanted his name for him. But I'm not gonna lie, even though no one in the arena was chanting it that night, and low-key up until like yesterday, I was like sitting in my room, like doing stuff, whether I'm like watching UFC, doing research for the card this weekend. I'm sitting there going, "Bye, son, go, bye, son, go," and I just can't stop myself. So maybe he did something right with that, but maybe next time leave it to the fans to start the chant. But moving on to the next fight, we've got Tim Elliott versus Kai Asakura. If I tell you I raged at this fight for so long, you got to believe me. I was raging at this fight for so long. I watched so much tape on this, and if you saw my predictions video, I was saying skill for skill. Elliott can definitely win this fight. I thought that Kaya Sakura's takedown defense was well overrated, and for weeks and weeks leading up to the fight, I thought Elliott had this one in the bag. Another thing is I kept saying people were picking Asakura by KO, but Tim Elliott has never been KO'd in the UFC, and he's only once been KO'd in his entire career, and it was in his second ever fight. Elliott's always shown to have a very good chin, and he recovers very well, but the thing is that I just could not pick him due to the time off. When people take 18 months, 12 months off and they haven't fought, I can never really pick him just because each time it's like the Krylov thing, where Krylov looks fantastic 12 months before, but he's been out for so long that he comes in against Dominic Reyes and just sprints forward chin first. And this time I didn't want to make that same mistake, but stylistically, Tim Elliott was always going to get to Kaya Sakura down. If you've seen Kaya Sakura's fights and Ryzen, anyone who tries to get him down gets him down. So Tim Elliott, I should have seen that he was still, even with the layoff, going to be able to get him down. I think it's more to do with strikers when they come back, or people who aren't like a through and through grappler. I think if they have a long layoff, their timing is so much worse and they always get smoked. But for a grappler, it's not as bad. And although I will say in that first round, I thought Tim Elliott's timing looked horrendous. I thought he was getting hit with everything that Kaya Sakura was throwing, and all of his shots were missing. But I think we all overestimated Kaya Sakura's danger on the feet and his grappling ability. If you saw in the first round when Asakura was able to move Tim Elliott backwards, it was looking good for Kai. Pardon me. But as Tim got down off the head kick, round one, as Tim got Kaya Sakura down from the head kick, Kai looked so lost on the ground. All his explosions to try get up, very little methodical technique to try get up. And round two, Kai looked so much more hesitant. He was moving back, biting on all of Elliott's feints. And I think he realized that if Elliott got him down, technically he was not getting up. And when Elliott was able to get him down, I think it was the blast double leg. I think that Kaya Sakura knew that he only had explosions, and if you watch that fight, he was just exploding off bottom, trying to just buck up when he didn't really use much technique, and he tried to wrestle up on a Tim Elliott, a guy who's got a fantastic guillotine. We've seen it time and time again. I think he's got 2 or 3 finishes by guillotine in the UFC, but as soon as Kai escaped the first takedown, he instantly, and got taken down again, he instantly closed the guard, and that was when I think everyone knew, oh, this guy's ground game's not the best. He just wants to stay here and stay alive. And against a guy like Tim Elliott, who's 38 years old, who's been out-grappled by Muhammad Makayev, who's had moments of being out-grappled against guys like Tegir Ulanbekov, even though they're both good grapplers themselves. We've seen the guys at the top of the division. We've seen the guys that look like they could be challenging for a belt handle Tim Elliott on the ground. And Tim Elliott was able to get a mounted guillotine. It was very tight. It was a very good guillotine. But Kai also wasn't fighting hands. And he tried to explode a couple of times out of it. And you can tell that the exploding out of positions usually works for him. But that no longer is the case in the UFC. And he loses the second time in a row. Just how good is Demetrius Johnson? Moving on to the next fight, we've got Jared Cannonier versus Michael Venom Page. This is exactly how I thought the fight would go down. MVP was always going to be a lot faster on the feet. Jared did have some good work in the clinch, but his footwork was a lot slower than MVP. And I also said in the predictions that MVP would be able to catch Cannonier every time with the leg kicks, just because Cannonier, although he's got a decent leg kick, he throws it very nakedly, and MVP was just able to read it and leap in with his right hand, dropping him in the first round really badly with that one. But in the clinch, MVP avoided the takedowns well. He was able to negate damage from Cannonier. In the second round, it looked much the same as the first. He was just able to land that 1-2 every now and then, every like 5 every like 40 to 50 seconds. And in the third round, Cannonier was able to get a takedown as MVP got over aggressive. MVP must be such a pain to fight just because he's constantly using his head as bait, and you try to swing and he's pulling back, but you feel like you can get very close to him, and then he emotes on you when you actually miss the shot. And even if he isn't landing shots, it feels like he's winning by making his opponents miss strike after strike after strike. And all these good strikers find it very difficult to get MVP trapped against the cage because he'll always evade the first two shots. And when you when you throw the third shot, he's moved so far that it's unlikely that it would actually land. And it almost looks like Cannonier didn't want to miss 3 shots in a row, just whiffing all of his combinations, so he would just throw 2. And I think if he wanted to even have a small chance of catching MVP in the fight, he would have to wing the third, the fourth, and the fifth shots out in a row, just hoping to catch him on the end of the punch. Because I think these fighters need to understand that MVP makes you look stupid until you make him look stupid. And when I say that, he will usually just make you look stupid for the entire fight. And even if you finish him, up until the finish, you look dumb as hell. And if you let him run around the cage and around the octagon, just playing his game, throwing one shot at a time, you're not going to catch him because he's the best at that game. That's what karate blitz style is. But if you wing shots, you might catch him eventually. Just because you look stupid after throwing your first 2 winging hooks. Maybe that third or fourth shot is the one that lands. And the way that MVP fights, the time that he gets hit by an overhand right by Jared Cannonier or by any of these heavy-powered middleweights, that's going to be the time he goes down. He's always off balance. He's never in a position to take a shot. I'm spitting everywhere. But MVP is very difficult to come up against for that reason. But if you keep throwing those shots, eventually you might land one. And MVP, we've seen it, I think it was Logan Storley or someone in a Bellator. They just threw a shot and it randomly landed. And that first, it's like the only clean shot Michael Page has been hit with, sent him to the canvas. And I think that anyone who can do that, anyone who can just keep throwing the shots like a Carlos Prates will be able to smoke MVP out cold. Talking about Carlos Prates, Jeff Neal versus Carlos Prates. What a performance this was from Carlos against a Jeff Neal who came to scrap. Jeff Neal started the fight looking really good. He had very fast hands and his kicks looked fantastic early. His timing briefly gave Prates some issues, maybe for the first 2 minutes of the fight. But as the fight was going along, you could see Prates' footwork was coming along and he was flowing a lot more in the fight. He was landing a lot of hard leg kicks on Jeff Neal. As he started to try Jeff Neal, Prates was making a lot of good reads by the time that he was smothering Jeff Neal. And the lead hook was starting to land in the knees as Neal was coming in. And as those knees landed, you could see that the timing was synced in. The counter shots of Neal were missing a lot and using good head movement, countering Neal himself. And at the end of the round, Prates landed a lead elbow, and it was a very nice lead elbow, very loud as well. It landed on the top of the guard of Jeff Neal. And then the very next exchange, he just lands a spinning elbow from Doom. And in the fight, the length of Neal was giving him so many problems, and Neal's style of going forward doesn't really work against guys who can punish them this bad. And as I said in the predictions, Neal struggles with these guys who are a lot taller than him. But Prates himself showed a lot of improvements in this fight. He used to do a lot of his damage moving forward, pressing his opponents against the cage. If you think of all of his flatline KOs like the Neil Magny, the Li Jingliang, even the Charles Radke knee, it was always after he had pressed his opponent up against the cage and sort of trapped them there. But this time he did it sort of in the open. He did it without trapping Jeff Neal. He did it because he knew that Jeff Neal was always going to come forward. He did it by just setting a trap and just making Jeff Neal come straight into it. And this is super impressive because throughout the fight, he was landing straight left hands, counter lefts the entire time. He was landing a counter knee to the body, and it was really working well. And all of this on the back foot. So we saw a new style from Carlos Prates, a new wrinkle to his game. I haven't really seen too many people talk about this because rewatching the fight, he spends most of the time moving backwards. And usually he gets his KOs by trapping you against the fence. So maybe he's getting a little bit more versatile with that. Moving on to the next fight, though, we've got Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico. I know that this is a tiny channel, but someone give me flowers. If any of you watched the predictions video, Someone just congratulate me on this pick. I just want to hear it. I want to feel it. I want to feel all the compliments from you guys. But even people picking Lerone were saying he was getting a decision win. But I was pretty confident coming into this that Lerone would be able to get a KO in this fight. I did think it would be a knee that finished Pico in it though. But second spinning elbow KO in the card, it was absolutely brutal. I will say, early on, I was a little bit worried because Pico started so fast. He was swinging massive combinations, shooting takedowns. And I will say, Aaron Pico, a lot of people are talking a lot of smack about him, but he's an absolute offensive juggernaut. If he stayed out of the UFC for the rest of his career, he would maybe lose one fight, and I wouldn't even be confident that he would lose a fight for the rest of his career if it wasn't in the UFC. The big difference between the guys in the UFC, though, is that they're all experts, well, especially the top guys, is that they're all experts at being the hammer and being the nail as well. Everyone has good offense in the UFC. It's also about the defense. And one thing I noticed in the breakdowns and in the predictions video and all of the tape study I did on Aaron Pico is although he looks like an absolute attacking buzzard, he is not defensively sound. And in Bellator, those guys felt some liver shots and they saw these blindingly fast punches and they assume straight away that they have no chance. You can see in the Henry Corrales fight, as soon as he takes like 3 liver shots, he's like, oh God, I'm 39. I'm a lot older than this Pico guy. I beat him when he was 22 years old. I don't think I can take him now. And they instantly just know that they feel and fold, whereas the UFC opponents are never going to do that, especially a guy like Lerone Murphy. In the UFC, they won't ever have that little self-confidence. These guys get caught and they figure out how to negate it or they figure out how to counter it, and that's exactly what Lerone did. Pico looked to hurt Murphy early into the fight, but Murphy was a little bit off balance. I think it was a right hand over the top. They clinched for a bit, and Lerone did something very smart that I've seen went completely under the radar, and he did it multiple times in the first round. I've seen literally no one point this out, but when they were in over-unders against the cage and Pico was trying to get his wrestling against him, Murphy was attempting that like elbow shoulder crank that John Jones did to Glover in their fight. We've seen it's the same thing that random fat American wrestler did against Sean Strickland in that training footage where when they've got the underhook, they use the overhook to sort of wrench their arm. And even though no one's pointed this out, and even though he didn't really do it fully properly, I'm sure that dissuaded Pico from pushing for the clinch continuously, because in that, it wasn't really like Lerone was turning around the clinch instantly. It was almost like Pico felt that and was like, oh, I don't really want to be here anymore. He got hit with a couple of knees as well straight after. But once the separation came, Pico went back to the exact same game plan. He was swarming Lerone Murphy, hitting him with some mean body shots. But this is sort of where you see Lerone start to turn gears. As Pico goes for the second body shot of the fight, Lerone lands a beautiful counter shot. And it was a counter elbow, I believe, rear counter elbow. And Pico shoots in. And Lerone instantly threatens the ninja choke, making sure to show Pico, you don't get 3 shots on me. And Pico passes through, but Lerone returned to the feet, doing another arm wrench on the get-up. But once it returned to feet, Lerone got to work, landing some nice kicks, countered Pico as Pico came in with a knee. And then, to me, it looks like Lerone tried to bake Pico by shelling up against the cage as he had done before at the beginning of the round. It was a similar position to where Adesanya put Pereira in before KOing him. And then Pico, as he had done the last 7 exchanges, whether it was going to the clinch or going to the body shot, he darts into range with his hands completely down and his head on center line. And you can see Pico and Lerone both step off at the exact same time, and you can see it wasn't like an instance where Lerone throws out the spinning elbow being like, oh, I hope that lands. It was like you could see as he was turning over, he was looking at Pico flat on. He was looking and making sure that would be the spot that he was landing. It was a very technical move. It wasn't just a out of nowhere spinning elbow. And coming into the fight, the most obvious counters to Pico were the rear elbow or the straight right, just due to that front body shot that Pico lands. I think I saw Nick Sick pointing this out on his podcast on Versus Us, where It is the perfect counter to that, and you could see that Lerone Murphy was landing that counter rear elbow or straight right. He was landing the rear knee as well, and you could see that Lerone was working those counters coming in. And I even saw, I think it was yesterday, Lerone posted a picture, video of him in the back doing that same spinning elbow. And I think that Lerone's a lot more skilled than people are giving him credit. He's a lot more cerebral than people are giving him credit. The reaction right now is that Pico had a glass jaw and that he's not a very good fighter. But whilst that's genuinely possible, I also think that Lerone was able to dispatch and defeat Pico with pure technique and ability. If you see the way that he steps off whilst watching Pico walk into his spinning elbow, was a work of art, and it doesn't matter how much Pico comes forward like a tard and way too aggressive. It was still an absolutely clinical performance from Lerone. And I don't know about anyone else, but this was the finish that watching it live, I had the most insane feeling. And watching it back as well, I had such a appreciation for how impressive the win was. Everything was going at such a high pace in the fight, and he still found the time to think about it, make cerebral reads, and tame the lion of Aaron Pico. I loved this fight. I was so happy to watch it. It was, honestly, it was such a good clinical finish. Moving on to the main event, though, the controversial main event. We got Dricus Du Plessis versus Khamzat Chimaev. Dricus was made to look ineffective in this fight. I would do a round-to-round recap, but it's not really that needed. Khamzat would shoot in the first 20 seconds of every round. He would land every single takedown when he would do that. And from there, DDP would have no chance to get up, as you would be put into crucifix, or on the attempt to stand up, DDP would partially give his back and get to the cage, where Khamzat would be able to use his weight to keep DDP down, riding him using some folk style, ground and pounding DDP until DDP would try to escape, and then Khamzat would re-grip the body lock and drag him back down. He was always in that body lock type position or the crucifix position in this fight. It was very, very impressive from Khamzat. And I've said it before, I have a top 10 best wrestlers in the UFC, and I put Khamzat on the top of that because he's such an impressive wrestler. And that was made abundantly clear in this fight. His ability to control a guy as big and strong as DDP is incredible. His positional understanding was next to none. And the body lock that he gets on Dricus with his hands and knees, when Dricus was on his hands and knees, throwing those short punches, was very smart because every time Dricus would try to move even an inch, he just regains the body lock, and it's sort of like an infinite control time glitch, where your opponent kind of has to address the lock, but then as they go to address the lock, they get punched so they don't move, and then as they go to move, the opponent addresses the lock. I just had a brain fart for 40 seconds there, but Khamzat was able to do this again and again and again. It was very smart, and he wasn't planning on posturing up, and he was content not rushing the back take or rushing a submission, so he was able to completely dominate the position, rendering a guy like Dricus completely useless, who people coming in were saying, including myself, was saying that he was going to be able to defend the takedowns in the later rounds. It was not true at all, and Khamzat's grappling is so impressive. The way that he was able to just blitz through DDP's guard played a massive factor into the fight as well. We saw in the Burns fight, Burns made it a little bit more difficult for Khamzat to pass that guard, and it made Khamzat work harder. Whereas Khamzat was just blitzing through DDP's guard every time. You would see DDP would try to secure the guard, but each time Khamzat was blitzing through instantly to side control. And when on the ground, it was the best move for him to go straight for the crucifix. Because if Dricus didn't, it would give up that same backside body lock position where he could work the rear naked choke, work the knees to the thighs. And those were the two positions that Khamzat recognized would use the least energy to stay in. And he would have the least chance of DDP escaping. He would also, especially from the crucifix position, he would sort of be given free rein to never frame off on the head and land some significant strikes of ground and pound. So it was a very smart choice to keep the fight there in that crucifix position. I will say DDP's grappling looked terrible in the fight. In hindsight, this was a bad pick from me to go with DDP, and I'm more than happy to say that, as Dricus in the past has shown that same efficiency from takedown defense. And the thing is, in the past, he showed it against guys who weren't as technical as Khamzat, and that he was able to still get back up. And we all know that DDP has good jiu-jitsu, but The levels of grappling were miles ahead for Khamzat, and every movement DDP did, Khamzat was waiting for. He knew that what DDP was going to do, especially after the first round. And it felt like if Khamzat roughed DDP, then he would be forced to like surrender the takedown each time. If he was roughing him up with little ground and pound shots, DDP every time felt like he had to just give up the takedown and stop going forward and stop pushing to get back up. But another thing I even spoke about in the predictions is I thought that Khamzat throughout the entire fight would be able to get easy takedowns on DDP just because of his natural style of fighting so upright and throwing punches without his feet being under him. So every time DDP was punching, he was off balance, ready for a takedown. And even then, we all know DDP is off balance in most of his fights anyway. So it was kind of clear in hindsight that this could happen. In hindsight, Bedtime's pick of, what was it? It was Khamzat by decision was actually a pretty good pick. But I thought that DDP would be able to get this one by decision. I thought in the later rounds he would have a better ability to get up from all these positions. And I was just a little bit disappointed with his wrestling defense as well. It looks like he had good first order takedowns, good sprawl, but then the second order takedown defense just wasn't there. And the last thing I wanted to talk about in this fight was that you're allowed to enjoy this fight. I've seen a lot of people saying that this was such a boring fight. You're a casual for finding it enjoyable. No, you're not a casual for finding it enjoyable, but in the same aspect, you're not a casual for finding it boring. The same, I would say, for me at least, this was a very similar entertainment level, or at least a little bit more because it was a title fight, but this was a similar fight to Jailton Almeida versus Derek Lewis, and at the time everyone was flooding everywhere, calling it boring, and no one really cared in the slightest. The difference between these two fights was that Jailton was in mount and Khamzat was in crucifix. It was the same amount of damage, both were doing pitter-patter shots, but I will say that Jailton actually went for a couple more submissions. He was credited with 4 submission attempts, whereas Khamzat really wasn't. I'm not saying that you shouldn't find this performance fun. You're well in your rights to, but I personally, after round 3, did not find it fun. I think my favorite thing about this sport is the consistent feel that both fighters are looking to finish or cause harm on each other, as it is a contact sport. But when it comes to winning without pushing for a finish, I no longer enjoy it. I didn't enjoy the Strickland versus Costa fight. Same way I didn't enjoy the Almeida versus Lewis fight. If you're not looking to push and break your opponent in ways, I'm not going to enjoy the fight. I enjoy Merab fights because he is looking to push and break his opponent. And I can be appreciative and be in awe of your technical abilities, but I don't have to enjoy watching it. And you're not a casual. Don't let people online tell you that you're a casual for wanting to be able to watch some actions, watch someone break each other. And before this fight, I was a massive Khamzat enjoyer. The way I would talk about him to people who didn't watch him fight was that he was like a crazed killer who gives you no respect and tries to finish you no matter what. He's the biggest badass in the middleweight division. He's the biggest badass of a grappler. When people would say, oh, grappling's not unenjoyable, I would be like, nah, watch Khamzat blitzkrieg through anyone and tell me that that's not enjoyable. The way that I talk about him to people is that I talk about him like he's literally like a crazed killer, and that's not what we saw today. We saw a Khamzat that was trying to minimize risk, and if you remember even a Volk versus Holloway 2, where everyone crucified Volk, not only for the decision, but they also crucified him, calling him boring, saying he was just leg kicking and holding Holloway down. Whereas that fight had 230 significant strikes between them. This one had 80. So we're so used to Khamzat risking losing position that when he was content with holding positions, it was such a stark difference between them. And honestly, all I wanted was him to go for something properly. Like, rewatching it, he didn't really attempt submissions properly. He would go for the grips, and as soon as DDP would adjust, he would move back to the body lock, or he would move back to securing the crucifix position. And he was just more content with tapping with shots on the side of the head rather than hunting for a submission. And the disappointment, I think, came with the outcome of the fight, because if Khamzat got a submission in the first round, I would feel hype and be like, Khamzat doesn't beat, no one beats Khamzat for the rest of his career. And I was even saying to my friend I was watching it with, whoever wins this fight, I'm never going to pick against now. That's not the case. Just because both of them kind of lost all the aura, even if Dricus is to blame for being unable to get off bottom and showing no wrestling defense, it also has to be put on to Khamzat for not throwing any significant strikes. It's not on to Khamzat for not win. Like, it's not like I'm saying he shouldn't have tried to win that fight. It's just on, like, even then, I don't even think Khamzat's at fault at all, but I just think us as fans, the future from now, we're just not going to be as excited for Khamzat. And honestly, if you want to avoid boring fights, you better make sure your takedown defense is the best in the world. Because honestly, the sport needs to avoid this sort of fight like it's the plague. Because some who already do the sport or who already train, who have supported it for a while, they'll enjoy that sort of fight. But new people who are introduced to the sport are just going to turn off the TV. If I introduce my dad to this fight or something, or someone who's just new to MMA, they're just never going to watch it again. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, sure, it could be technical. I just don't understand it. So if you want a bigger fan base for the sport, this isn't going to help. And maybe the way to fix this is getting these guys in and making them wrestle constantly. I'm so sorry for releasing this so many days late. If you liked the video, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to be very regular now because I've just upgraded every single piece of technology I've got. So stay tuned. We'll have so much better content in the future. I'm going to be going live every now and then. I'll probably do some Dana White Contender Series lives, maybe some Apex main events. But if you enjoyed the video, leave a like and subscribe, and I'll catch you next time. Peace.